Hi, I'm Brett Godfrey, and for today's episode of Viewpoint, I'd like to talk to you about how to get back to life, how to go back into the world as the pandemic looks like it's going to wind down enough that it's safe to do so. I'd like to tell you a quick story because it sets the tone for the principle that I'm about to lay out, and that has to do with skydiving. I'm used to be a competitive skydiver. I have thousands of jumps, but I remember my very first skydive, and I remember how scared I was. I was absolutely terrified, sitting in the plane, watching people go out the door, knowing that in a matter of seconds I would be next. And I started to genuinely doubt whether I had the courage to actually leap out the door of a small Cessna. And in years that followed, I jumped in all kinds of airplanes and all kinds of boogies, which are national level skydiving meets, and I got used to it. But that first skydive, I was so terrified. My mouth was as dry as a desert. My heart was pounding like it wanted to claw its way out of my chest. I had blurry vision. I was so scared. And then somehow I ended up finding the courage to take the leap. And the next thing you know, I was under a canopy and headed for a safe landing on the ground. Then I did another jump, and then I did another jump, and another, and another, and another. And after I did it a bunch of times, I got to the stage where I could be as calm riding to altitude in an airplane for a jump as I am sitting here right now. It took repetition to do that. Now, in the course of the past year, we've been under lockdown, and some of us have been more hermit-like than others. I personally have been very hermit-like because of my age, and I have high blood pressure and asthma. Growing old is not for the faint of heart, I'll tell you that. But in this past year, our brains, at least for most of us, have been rewired by the everyday, 24-hour-a-day threat of potential severe illness, long hauler syndrome, or death, and we've become conditioned to live in fear. Now, there is a thing in science called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the tendency of the human brain to rewire its heuristic pathways and its neural pathways to accommodate an environment that lasts for a long time. And we see this in people who are underway to recover from diffuse axonal injuries, which is a closed head injury that sometimes happens in car accidents or sports accidents. And the brain does have an ability to rewire itself. This has only been understood in the past several years. It was thought for a long time that the brain doesn't ever change. Once it develops into a mature adult brain, it's just going to be that. And if you have damage to some part of it, that's the end of that. Nothing can be fixed. And we've learned that neuroplasticity is responsible for a lot of things, including the ability to learn new skills. So, for example, if you took up golf and first swing the club, it's going to be not something a golfer would want to be doing. You have to train your body. And we talk about something called muscle memory. And in truth, muscle memory is really the manifestation of neuroplasticity. It means that the brain has started to rewire itself to shortcut and automate repetitive cycles. The repetitive cycle that has been troublesome for all of us is the lack of social contact, the isolation, the loneliness, and the sense that your destiny, at least for as long as you can see into the future, is to get out of bed and have another COVID day in your house. Maybe several hours of Zoom conferences, maybe not. Maybe you sit around all day watching Netflix or binge watching something like SEAL Team or Jack Ryan, which are my personal favorites. But the brain has become completely adapted to the invisible fear that we all feel, but you can't see it. And that's because we've been inundated with media article after media article, and a lot of these are alarmist publications that are just trying to sell advertising. So they make it much scarier so that you feel from a survival urge point of view that you have to read the article. so you can equip yourself with knowledge and not die. And that's been going on for over a year. So if you think back, the first threat of COVID-19 was under discussion at the end of 2019 in December. By December, we were talking about, oh my gosh, this is going to be a global pandemic. It's going to be a cataclysmic Armageddon event. And so we've been living with that and living with it day after day, week after week, month after month. And now we find ourselves within sight of returning to a quote unquote new normal, whatever that is. And I challenge you to consider when people say, well, the new normal will never be like the old normal. Well, that would have been true anyway, with or without COVID. That's the nature of change in the world. Tomorrow is never going to be an exact replay of yesterday. There was a really fantastic news article here in Denver that featured a pulmonologist by the name of Fernando Holguin. And it's a comedy skit that he did for the Golden Globe Awards with a professional actress. And they were talking about Groundhog Day, and she's complaining to her doctor that every day is the same as the last. And he says, well, have you had a irresistible urge to kill someone every day? And it's the character from the movie Groundhog Day. And she says, yes, I have. And it's very funny. And Fernando Holguin is a brilliant physician, and he was raised as the example in this Golden Globe skit of the hero practitioner who's stayed on the front lines and treated people all throughout without being too terrified of his own personal safety to be effective as a doctor. I know Dr. Holguin very well, and I can tell you that he really is at the vanguard and a great example of the heroism of all of the healthcare providers that have been fighting for all of us over the last year. But when we look at the repetitive process and the nature of human habit, we have become habituated to be afraid, to be agoraphobic, which is fear of open spaces, and to live in an isolated environment under fear constantly, with a total perpetual sense of deprivation. We've had this sense that we're being deprived every minute of every day, and every now and then we think, oh, it would be fun to go to the mall, or it would be fun to go to a restaurant. I have a personal favorite restaurant that I used to go to once a week, and haven't been there for over a year, and I stopped thinking about it because I have been habituated. So this negative rewiring of the brain that I'm talking about, I suffer from it. And I've started to really examine my own thought process. I try to be mindful. I try to be aware of the voices and urges and thoughts in my own mind. And by doing that, I've become acutely aware of the fact that I've been injured and I've been rewired. Now, I'm not going to whine about it because everybody else in this country's probably got the same problem. What do we do, say, in April or May, whenever it happens, that people like Dr. Fauci or the state governor of your state or even the federal government comes out and says it's now safe to do a lot more things, and they'll start listing what those things are. Of course, if you've been vaccinated, you still have to wear a mask when you get around other people, which sort of undoes the psychological benefit of knowing that you're immune to COVID now. Or more or less functionally immune to COVID, or if you do get it, you're not anywhere near as likely to have long hauler syndrome or death or something like that. So it's going to happen, and it's not that far away that you'll be able to get in your car and go to the grocery store, and maybe you wear a mask, maybe you don't, but you're not in danger. And you're not a danger to other people because the vast majority of medical literature released to date says somebody who's been vaccinated has enough antibodies to wipe out the viral load that makes them a human bioweapon. So they're not anywhere near as contagious, if at all. And that's the trend in medical literature today, is to accept the notion that when enough people have been vaccinated and we have this quote unquote herd immunity, which just means that vulnerable people don't come into contact with each other frequently enough for one to spread the disease to the other, and therefore it just stops moving through society. That's herd immunity. But as we approach that day, I think we need to start to psychologically prepare ourselves so that we don't continue to hibernate. We don't continue to live in fear because the habit is there. Fear is a habit. Let me say it again. Fear is a habit. Now, you can have an instant surge of fear if you see that you're about to get T-boned in an intersection by another car, but that is also a conditioned response. You wouldn't have felt that if you were a child in a car and didn't know how to drive, never been in an accident, don't appreciate the signs of imminent injury. You have to learn about these things. You have to learn that you can jump out of an airplane and not be terrified, because after 500 or 600 skydives, you start to trust your parachute. And it gets normal for you, about like getting off a chairlift at a ski area. It's frightening for new skiers to ride a chairlift, but it becomes everyday fare for the experienced skier. We have to propel ourselves into a new block or matrix of habits, and that doesn't happen overnight. I'm particularly influenced by a book called The Power of Habit, which talks about habit stacking and how to build your habits on purpose. But one of the principles of that book is you don't do it all at once. You don't suddenly change every habit you have on day one and expect an easy ride so that pretty soon all those changes become normal later, because it's too much change. And there's a natural tendency to resist major habitual changes. That's why we call them habits. They tend to be self-reinforcing, or maybe just self-enforcing. So I submit to you that what we should do now is begin to think very positively and very deliberately about what it's going to take to recover from the psychological and, in some instances, neurophysiological injuries that we've been sustaining every day for the last year. So I recommend this approach. We need to start focusing on repairing ourselves. We need to do that from a standpoint of being aware that we have been injured. It's an easy injury to miss because it came gradually. It's sort of like the story of the frog in the boiling water. You put a frog into a pot of boiling water, he'll struggle and try to jump out. You put a frog in a pan of cold water and gradually elevate it to boiling temperature, the frog will boil. It just will sit there because it's a gradual thing. And we've been the frog in the pot. And we've now been boiled by a year of fear, a year of isolation, a year of deprivation, possibly a year of severe depression and anxiety. We've been rewired by that. And that's an injury. That's a very real injury. What we need to understand is that it's repairable. But like all forms of rehabilitation, it takes work. It's interesting, if you have a knee operation and your knee joint is very fragile because it's been invasively traumatized by a surgeon's hand, and then what do? They make you use that joint in rehab. And orthopedists will tell you that the key to rehabilitation is diligence, repetition, and chronicity, which means you're always doing it. And so we have to treat our psyches, our brains, our bodies, our hormonal systems, our psychological view of the world, which I call a Veltenchang, which is a German word, sort of like the lens through which you see the universe. We have to understand that that is not what it was a year ago. And we have to propel ourselves forward to something new, not running away from anything, running to something. That's a mindset, and I really think it's important for you to adopt that mindset. It's not about escaping the past. It's about reaching the future and designing that future. We have that power. We can't control everything that happens, but we can build up a mental image of a certain ideal future and then start systematically with our Homo sapien brains listing the action steps we need to take to get to that ideal future. What that means is a lot of us have stopped going for walks the way we were all going for walks at the start of the pandemic. As we went through the summer of pandemic, a lot of people were outside running, walking, getting exercise. In fact, many people were getting more exercise in the first half of the pandemic than they ever got in their life before that, because they just were going stir crazy, cabin fever, had to get out. So then it got very, very cold. We've been in a cold snap in this country that seems to have lasted a really long time. People are now staying inside because it's so damn cold outside. It's starting to warm up now. We'll have some more storms before spring is really upon us. But I submit to you that every nice day, you've got to get up and go outside and walk around. You've got to talk to people. Even if you maintain social distancing, even with your mask on, you've got to get back into that effort, that focused effort to talk to people, more people every day. And then you have to think about shedding your pandemic pounds. I gained about 20 pounds during the pandemic, and I'm not a very tall person, so 20 pounds really shows on me. But you've got to think about the rehab. I am now in rehab. I'm going to recover gradually with careful control over my life, stacking my habits to become more and more equipped to return to what life used to be. Now, if you want to call that a new normal, you can, but I don't like that term. I don't like the new normal because it's a term that has been shrouded in mystery on purpose by the news media because people stick to mysteries. This is why Agatha Christie is such a successful writer. People are drawn magnetically, almost by magic, to mysteries. And it sells newspaper articles. It sells advertising. So the mystery of what will the new normal be, that is a term that I think is psychologically destructive, emotionally harmful, and I would avoid it. You decide what the new normal is going to be. You just have to realize the danger is going to be gone. And that means you will have freedom you're not used to exercising. Your freedom muscles are flaccid. Your self-determinism is flaccid. You've been helpless for a year. Now the danger being soon to be erased, or at least mitigated to such a degree that it's not anywhere near the threat that we think of it as today, you have to think, all right, how am I going to flex my new muscles? You know, they're still baby muscles. They're still just now starting to grow back. What am I going to do? I have to change my thought process. And I believe that to do that, you have to stack your habits. So here's a good habit to stack. 1, every time you get into a Zoom conference, ask yourself, can this be done another way? I crave meetings. I'm a professional trial lawyer. I used to spend an awful lot of my time interrogating witnesses under oath in a conference room full of lawyers. And there's a certain social behavior among lawyers that's kind of weird. It's the subject of so many TV shows and movies, you can't even count it. But that's because it's interesting and it's actually fun. I haven't done any of that for a year. Everything's been on Zoom. So now I'm asking myself, what can I do live? So as I sit here now, I'm talking to you from my law office in Englewood, Colorado, and I have started to be around my office workers much more frequently. I get my shot the day after tomorrow, and that will hopefully within 5 days give me some level of increased immunity. 3 weeks later, I'll get my second shot, and after that, I'm basically as bulletproof as science can make us today. So I'm preparing a new routine. I'm thinking hard about what it will take to fight off that cabin. It used to be cabin fever. Now it's like addicted to confined spaces, so I'm safe. How do I fight that off? Well, for me, it's going to be a certain series of steps that includes appearing in court, taking depositions live. Once the other lawyers have all been inoculated, it's going to be totally safe to do. Returning to jury trials. The jury trials that have been taking place in this country are a mockery of justice because the psychological distractions of glass cubes in the courtroom and the jury being spread all over the room instead of in a place where a lawyer can talk to the jury all at once, that stuff has made the trial process so unpredictable and so cumbersome that the quality of justice rendered in those court cases is nothing like it was before. But very soon I see myself standing in front of a jury without a mask, and the jury's not wearing masks, and we're trying ourselves a lawsuit. And I'm looking forward to that. People don't like lawyers and they don't like to hear about lawsuits, but that's my job. So for me, that's how I recover, come out of hibernation, and get back to the world. I start thinking about exercising outdoors. There's a lot of outdoor gyms in most cities now. But the beauty of exercising outdoors is you get sunlight, you get more vitamin D, and it's just been proven that sunlight is healthy for you mentally. Fresh air is healthy for you mentally. Of course, exercise has its own benefits. But I want you to start thinking about which habits you should start to stack up so that it will be much speedier recovery for you. You have to take control of that. You have to apply a sense of self-awareness. You have to decide which steps you can tolerate and start taking those as soon as possible. You may have to delay this some because in your age group, your demographic, your tranche that you're in for vaccination, it may yet be another couple of months before you get your vaccine. Joe Biden is talking about trying to have the entire nation vaccinated by the end of May or early July as a goal. I think that goal is reachable. And I think that your release date from prison is approaching faster than you think. So start to prepare. I'm Brett Godfrey. Thank you for listening.